Here are some examples of what your body can do with ATP. So I had said before that ATP is the currency that your body uses, the energy source that your body uses to do everything. But I really wasn't very clear with the everything part. So I'm going to give you just a few examples here to show you what I mean by everything. So here's just the first example. Well, first of all, here's ATP to remind you what it looks like. Adenosine triphosphate, so it's a nucleotide. Just like DNA and RNA are made up of a bunch of nucleotides, this whole thing, ATP, is just one nucleotide, so it's a monomer, not a polymer. And the T stands for tri, so we've got 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. And if it were ADP, you'd only have 2, and AMP, you'd only have 1. Okay, so anyway, here's ATP. Here's the first example. ATP's energy is used by all cells for supplying activation energy for chemical reactions. So here's a chemical reaction, and you start with Y, which is the reactant, and you change something about it with an enzyme, and you end up with the product, which is X. And here's the activation energy. So we said in our last unit that enzymes decrease the activation energy, so it'll be big and it'll take it down. But you still have some kind of activation energy. The distance here is the activation energy, and that's supplied by ATP. Oops. So that's one particular example. Let's look at some others. The next example is active transport of substances across cell membranes. So here's an example of a neuron that's sending a bunch of stuff out and a bunch of other stuff in. So if you look at a neuron, neurons are found in your brain and in your spinal cord. And going from your spinal cord or your brain to all the muscles and glands of your body. And so this is kind of a bad picture, but this is a really bad picture. Pretend this is a really thin little fibril. And so this is the beginning of the neuron, and the impulse goes this way. And the way the body works is that it forces, the neurons force sodium, which is an ion. They force the sodium outside the neuron. So there will be some sodium inside, and your body will force almost all the sodium outside. And there's another ion called potassium, and your body will shove all that stuff in. And so your neuron will look something like this. Then when an impulse comes along this way, let's say it gets to this little section, the sodium will come in, and then next to it the sodium will come in, and then next to it the sodium will come in, and then the potassium goes out, out, out. And so once the impulse goes through, your body has to fix that. It has to shove the sodium back out and the potassium back in. So the sodium that came in now has to get shoved out. The potassium that went out now has to get shoved back in. And that's what this thing does. It's an ATP pump. It's a sodium-potassium pump, but it uses ATP. So it's a protein. These things are lipids that make up the cell membrane. So this red part that I drew, that's the cell membrane, and that's made up of these phospholipids. But in the cell membrane, embedded in the cell membrane in a whole bunch of places, are these proteins that are called the sodium-potassium pump. They'll take sodium and shove them out, and potassium, the red ones, and shove them in. Here's some more yellow sodium, shoving them out, and the potassium are red in this picture, and they're being shoved in. And if you look at the little dot over here, that's ATP. And so this pump, to do this, to change shape and to move this stuff, takes energy because you're shoving all the sodium out. So that's against a concentration gradient, and you're shoving all the potassium in, which is, again, against a concentration gradient. You can't really see it in this picture, but imagine tons of yellow sodiums here, and your body shoving all the other sodiums out this way. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we do the nervous system, but the idea that I want you to get is that this would not happen without ATP. This molecule, this protein, it doesn't recognize glucose, it doesn't recognize fructose, it doesn't recognize an amino acid, it doesn't recognize anything except ATP. So this whole thing would not work without ATP, and that's how your body evolved. All the little parts use ATP. They don't use anything else, and that's true for all life on the planet. Another example is movement, growth, reproduction, etc. I just have this guy because he's goofy. Here's a more specific example for movement. So this is just a picture of how muscle cells use ATP at the molecular level. So first of all, picture a muscle. So one of your muscles might look like this. Oops. And maybe that's your bicep. And here's a tendon that will connect it to your elbow, and here's a tendon that connects it to your shoulder. So when this contracts, this part typically stays where it is. When it contracts, if you put your hand on your bicep, on your muscle in your upper arm, and you contract it, you'll feel the muscle get thicker, and it actually gets shorter. So I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit, but here it is getting thicker and shorter. So you've still got your tendon, but what it's done, this is really exaggerated, but what it's done is it's gotten thicker and shorter, and it's moved the bone that it was attached to. So that's why when you contract your biceps muscle, you're bringing your hand toward your shoulder. So here's the way it works. You're doing that, and you can see it at your organ level, at the muscle. But what's happening inside the muscle, inside every muscle cell that's contracting, is that you have these proteins called actin and myosin that are getting pulled together to make the whole muscle cell shorter and thicker. And so if you have enough muscle cells getting shorter and thicker, the whole muscle itself gets shorter and thicker. So this protein right here, pictured in A, this protein is actin, and this protein is myosin. Myosin is actually much bigger, but I'm only showing you one little piece of it, so picture a big molecule down here. So anyway, here's ATP, and it's attached to what's called the cross bridge of the myosin. So myosin is this long molecule that'll be here, and here's just one of the cross bridges. There'll be a whole bunch of cross bridges coming off of it. When ATP attaches, it changes the shape of this, and it's called cocking the cross bridge, believe it or not. And so it goes from this shape to kind of straight this way. And so here you can see the cross bridge is cocked. And what's happened is that the ATP has been broken down to ADP and PI. So let me show you what that looks like. You have ATP, so I'm not going to draw the sugar and the base because I don't want to right now, but we'll pretend this is the sugar and the base. And it's got 3 phosphates attached because it's ATP. And so when ATP breaks down, let's switch. This bond right here is broken. And so when that bond is broken, it releases energy. Energy needed to, for example, cock the cross bridge. And the thing that's left is this thing, which is A. And I can't put 3 P's on it because one of them got cut off. So instead of ATP, now I have ADP. And of course, I've got that extra P, so I say plus P. So P plus ADP, and over here we had ATP. So now the cross bridge is cocked, and so it's in the right configuration to attach to the actin. So it attaches, and then ADP comes off, and this cross bridge moves this way. And what's happening is that you have a whole bunch of myosin molecules with their cross bridges sticking out, and here's some actin, and you take the actin and you move it from this position, and you keep yanking it with all these things, and you move it so that it's more like this position afterwards. So you've pulled the stuff in. So picture pulling a whole ton of those in every muscle cell, and what you end up going from is this elongated cell to this short fat muscle. And so that's what you do with your different muscle cells. So ATP is the only thing that this myosin recognizes. It doesn't recognize any kind of sugar or any kind of anything at all, only ATP. So that's what you need your ATP for. Okay, so I'm going to be done with that. And this video that I show in class, I'm going to try to put up on It's Learning for you.